It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the silence. The kind that doesn't just fall over a room, it sharpens, like glass ground into your throat. The kind that lives in the crease of your father's brow, in the empty space where your name should have been on the parchment he left behind. The kind that doesn't whisper we disapprove, but declares you never existed. I sat in the back row of the chapel, not by choice, by choreography. My sister had arranged the seating chart. One look at it and I understood they weren't pretending I was late. They were pretending I wasn't hers. Not Margaret's daughter, not his soldier, just an old friend of the family, in uniform, holding a black clutch and a folded-up ache. Outside. The motorcade still hummed. The flag on Dad's casket hadn't yet been handed to the eldest, because that wasn't me, not here, not in their eyes. My younger brother, Julian, the finance consultant who never saluted a single flag, was to receive it. I gripped the edge of the pew and watched my own life get passed over, name by name. A family slideshow rolled behind the pulpit, and when it reached my graduation photo, West Point, 2002, full regalia, it skipped. The image blinked on screen for half a second, then dissolved. Like a glitch they didn't care to fix. Or maybe they'd planned it that way. Wouldn't be the first time someone edited me out. The lawyer read the will. To Julian, the watch. To Sarah, the lake house. To Mom, the retirement accounts. And then the pause. And to my eldest daughter he read, who chose another life, another name, another code. I never understood that pause again. I leave my regret, and the hope that she finds her way back. Not a dollar, not a medal, not a memory, just exile, dressed in prose. I didn't cry. That's the thing about grief: when you've trained in war zones, it doesn't hit the same. It waits until you're alone in a bathroom stall with fluorescent lights and no windows. Then it collapses in waves. But I stayed seated, back straight, face unreadable, the braid of my hair tucked neatly under my cap. My boots were shined, my collar pressed, and every muscle in my jaw locked around the weight of a sentence I'd rehearsed since my first deployment. I don't need to be welcomed. I only need to serve. Still, even soldiers have thresholds. When the chaplain asked if anyone wanted to speak, I stood. Heads turned like dominoes. My mother blinked in surprise, and Julian smirked like I was about to embarrass myself. The pews bristled with ties and pearls and whispers, civilians who never once stepped foot inside a tactical brief room but had all the opinions in the world about my choices. I walked to the podium, each step a memory. Kabul, Djibouti, Frankfurt, a blackout op in northern Syria no one would ever acknowledge. Not even me. Not really. Those steps weren't mine. They belonged to every woman who ever gave up a name to wear a call sign. I looked down at the mic, then up at the cross above the altar, and I said, I will not speak ill of the dead. That was all. I walked back down the aisle like it was a runway of ghosts, and just as I passed my sister, she muttered under her breath, "Still think you're better than us?" Even now I didn't flinch. Just slid back into the back pew and folded my hands. The service ended. The casket lowered. The inheritance finalized without me. 2 weeks later, I received a package in a plain brown envelope. No return address. Just a Pentagon seal and a single line: priority command access enclosed. I opened it in silence. Inside a black card. My new clearance level. A letter. Handwritten. Not printed. General. It read, "You are needed. Immediate assignment. Your presence is no longer requested. It is required." I stared at the word, General, and I thought of the will. The word disgrace, etched in metaphor across its lines. I thought of the face my father wore when I told him I was entering military intelligence, not medical school like he wanted. You'll vanish, he said. You'll lose yourself in the shadows and no one will know who you were. Maybe that was the point. But here I was, a general, summoned not by inheritance, but by duty. I packed lightly, just the essentials. Uniform, ID, boots that had crossed borders darker than anything in his estate. I didn't write a note to the family. What would I say? Sorry, I missed the lake house barbecue. I had a secure debrief at Langley. No. I left in silence the same way I'd learned to enter buildings I wasn't meant to see, and leave lives I was never meant to claim. On the flight to DC, I stared out the oval window, clouds rising like smoke trails, and for the first time in weeks, I asked myself, have you ever been erased not by strangers, but by those who swore they loved you? Have you ever sat in a family circle that closed its arms and left you standing just outside the clasp? Because the pain isn't in the loss. It's in the remembering. It's in the wedding invites that stopped arriving. The family group chats where your name became a topic, not a participant. The birthdays marked by silence. The father who taught you to ride a bike, only to write you out of his last words like you were a wrong equation. I used to wonder if I made the wrong choice. If West Point, if Intel School, if Covert Command, if 22 years of classified sacrifice was all just a rebellion, a way to prove something. But then I remembered the children we evacuated from a burning hospital in 2011, the civilian translator whose hand I held as the bullets came closer, the intercepted signal that saved a village no one will ever know existed. And I stopped needing their approval. Because I had something better. Proof. Proof that even if my own blood forgot me, the flag didn't. I stepped off the plane into DC night air. And there, waiting under the tungsten halo of runway light was a car. Black, government-plated. The driver saluted. He opened the back door and said, "Welcome back. General. Not ma'am. Not officer. General." And for a second, just one quiet, trembling second, I felt my throat tighten. Not from pain, but from the strange, aching feeling that maybe, finally, I had returned. Not to a family, but to a truth. A place that never wrote me out. A list that had always included my name. The car smelled like silence leather and protocol. Polished seatbelts that had never been stained with blood. Not like mine. I sat in the back, eyes fixed on the window, watching the city glide past in sharp reflections. Monuments rose like old wounds turned marble. Lincoln, Jefferson, the dome of Capitol Hill, pristine and hollow. My boots tapped gently against the floor. Steady, measured. ETA 10 minutes. General. The driver said without turning, General. The word still didn't sit comfortably in my chest, not because I hadn't earned it, but because I had so thoroughly. It scared them. A woman who didn't just climb the ladder, but rewired it. A daughter who didn't come home crying, but came home encrypted. With classified scars and no need for applause, we crossed the Potomac. Langley was waiting. The briefing was urgent. I was told only 2 things, black file. 6 eyes only. Immediate command restructure. And yet, as the driver turned toward the access checkpoint, my mind didn't follow. It wandered backward to a kitchen table in 1997. My father in his pressed slacks and navy polo, flipping through the Wall Street Journal. Me in ROTC uniform, home for spring break. His face unreadable. "You know they won't make it easy for someone like you," he said, not looking up. "Someone like me?" I asked, already knowing. He lowered the paper half an inch. A woman with opinions. I laughed, thin and sharp. "Then I guess I'll be difficult." He folded the paper. "They'll crush you. Then I'll bleed with purpose." He never responded, just left the room. Quietly, like retreating was wisdom. That was his way. And this silence in his will was just the final echo of all the sentences he never finished. We cleared the gate. I scanned my card, placed my palm on the biometric reader. The door clicked open like a whisper, and Langley swallowed me whole. Inside, the hallway was sterile, humming. Men in pressed uniforms nodded as I passed, some with respect, others with confusion. I could read it in their brows. Her the daughter from the news, because oh yes, the will had leaked. Not the full contents, but just enough to spark whispers. Decorated soldier disinherited by veteran father, a disgrace in dress blues. They didn't know my record, but they knew the gossip, the family tension, the juicy little drama of a military bloodline tainted by a daughter who spoke too little and fought too much. I reached the situation room. Inside 3 men, one I knew, General Ramirez, one I'd only met in passing, Director Cho, and one I didn't recognize. But his eyes flicked to my ribbons like he was tallying them. General, Ramirez said, rising. You're here. Of course I am, I said. You summoned me. They slid the file across the table. No names, no preamble, just Operation Mirrored Phoenix. I flipped the cover open, read, and read again. Kidnappings, cyber infiltration, foreign assets turning to vapor, then a single name I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years, Captain Elijah M. I closed the file. Slowly. You're reactivating Task Gray. Ramirez nodded, but not the old way. We need something quieter, sharper. You need a ghost. He didn't smile. We need you. I should have hesitated, should have said no, should have calculated the cost of another 6 months underground, living with false names and dead hours. But instead I said, when do I leave? Cho pushed forward a key. Tonight. And just like that, my life pivoted again, not with drama, but with decision. As I stepped out of the building, the sun was just beginning to fall, laying long shadows across the pavement. That hour when the world softens, but nothing heals. I walked to the car alone, and I thought of my sister's voice again. Still think you're better than us? No, not better. Just elsewhere. Do you know what it feels like to succeed in the one world that still tries to pretend you don't belong, only to return home and be told that your success is irrelevant? Do you know what it's like to see your medals collecting dust while your brother's golf trophies sit in a glass cabinet with lighting? Do you know what it feels like when your mother greets you at the door with, "You're looking thin," instead of, "You're alive"? Because I do. I've lived in rooms where my silence saved lives, and in houses where my silence was mistaken for shame. I've walked through blast doors and watched men 3 times my size hesitate to speak before me, only to go home for Christmas and have my uncle ask if I ever thought of settling down. I've sat across from double agents who respected me more than my own family did. So no, I don't think I'm better. But I know who I am. That night, in the hotel, I unzipped the case, inside uniform, newly pressed, medals arranged like a confession, a letter marked only with a single code, eyes only, Phoenix Rose. I changed slowly, folding civilian silence into military noise, tied my hair back into the regulation bun, pinned my insignia with fingers that didn't tremble, not anymore. I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I saw her, the girl they forgot, the woman they tried to shame, the soldier they couldn't break. She was standing taller now, because she knew, tomorrow, they would all watch the news. They would see the photo, a classified ceremony, 3-star command, highest clearance in her unit's history. And they would realize too late that while they were busy writing her out of wills and birthday cards, the Pentagon was rewriting history in her name. But I didn't do it for them. I did it because I had nothing left to prove, only everything left to protect. When I returned to base, My boots hit the tarmac like truth. The wind picked up. A flag rippled against a black night. I saluted it not for them. For me. For the girl who used to sit outside her own family's dinners, pretending it didn't matter. For the young woman who bled through her first covert op with a shattered rib and a shredded call sign. For the general who now answered only to the highest code and still carried her father's silence in her spine. You don't get to choose the family that raises you, but you can become the woman they'll never forget. I arrived at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling before dawn. The air was so still it felt ceremonial, like even the weather knew what was about to unfold. Security cleared me through 5 gates. My name wasn't questioned. My rank wasn't doubted. They knew who I was, not because of bloodline, but because of record. My record, not my father's shadow, not my family's reputation, mine. I walked the tarmac alone, the sky bleeding soft amber behind hangars and control towers. The silence here wasn't like the one at my father's funeral. It wasn't exclusion, it was discipline, purpose, respect. Inside the command room, every eye followed my steps, not with skepticism, but with quiet calculation. Officers I hadn't seen in years straightened their backs. Some whispered, but no one dared speak loud enough to break the rhythm of my stride. They knew. A woman doesn't make it here without bleeding silently through 1,000 locked rooms. Ramirez was waiting. "Graybird," I said, using the old call sign. He handed me the fresh brief. "Graybird's in play. Our team is scattered, but your authority's solid. Command has full faith. Command. Full faith." The words struck deeper than any apology my family never gave. The assignment: high-level intercept. European theater. Diplomatic entanglement buried in espionage. A target they couldn't officially name. Operating under a ghost. Alias that once belonged to a man I trained. Elijah. He'd gone dark 6 years ago. Presumed dead. I buried him in my memory, alongside the others who vanished behind classified shrouds. But this file, it hinted otherwise. A fingerprint. A satellite trace. A sequence code only 2 people ever used: him and me. I stared at the last page. A message recovered from a scrambled channel Phoenix. "If you're reading this, they lied to us both." That was all. No sender ID. No timestamp. Just enough to twist open a chamber in my chest I'd long sealed shut. I signed the documents. Took the mission. No hesitation. When I walked back into daylight, the wind had picked up sharp and cold. I boarded the C-17 transport with my gear in silence. The engines roared, and the ground shrank away beneath us. And somewhere, as we crossed into clouds thick as concrete, I felt that question surface again. Have you ever been summoned by the world? Just as your family decided you didn't exist? I remember the last time I tried to explain my job to my father. We were sitting in his study, 3 months before he died. He'd called me in not for reconciliation, not even to check in, just to ask if I still believed in all that cloak and dagger nonsense. I tried to answer, to give him a glimpse of what I carried. But he cut me off. "You could have had a real career. Something visible. Something your family could be proud of." And that was the moment I knew. He didn't want me. He wanted an echo. A daughter who wore pearls and raised a family in Virginia, not one who wore a headset in a war bunker and pulled the trigger from 5,000 miles away. He wanted comfort. I gave him discomfort. He wanted reflection. I gave him defiance. So he erased me, first in voice, then in will. But the Pentagon, they didn't need my name on an invitation. They had it on a war room wall. We landed in Ramstein under cover of night. A secure convoy waited. German soil felt colder than I remembered, maybe because the last time I was here, I wasn't the one giving orders. I met the assembled team in an underground briefing room with concrete walls and flickering LEDs. Young, Sharp-eyed officers from multiple branches. Not one of them questioned my rank. They didn't need a father's signature to believe in my leadership. They'd read my mission trail. A Navy analyst named Porter gave the first rundown. We've got 2 possible locations: Berlin and Zagreb. Intel suggests a meeting in the next 72 hours, and we believe Elijah or someone using his ID is going to be there. I nodded. We move now. No delays. Porter hesitated. Ma'am, if it is Elijah, it won't change the mission. I cut in, but even I knew that was a lie. I spent the next 36 hours awake, planning, coordinating, reading every line of the file like it was a prayer. And at 0400 we intercepted the signal, encrypted ping, confirmed alias, Operation Greenlit, Berlin. We moved fast. I led the operation not from the back, but from the front. That's always been my way. As we entered the compound, a half-abandoned embassy annex converted into an Intel safe house, I saw him, or someone I thought was him. Same gait, same height. My heart faltered once, but my voice didn't. Hands up. Do not move. He turned, and it was Elijah. Older, scarred, but those eyes, same fire, same betrayal. You came, he said. I didn't answer. He raised his hands slowly. They tried to bury me, like they did to you. I said nothing, because this wasn't a reunion. It was proof. Proof that I had been right to stay silent, to keep going. That the names we carry don't define us. The missions do. Elijah was taken into custody. The operation closed. The next morning, I stood on the embassy rooftop, watching the city stir, and I thought, what will they say when they hear will my brother tilt his head and ask, wait. She led what will my sister scroll through the article and realize the woman she deleted from her photos now wore 3 stars. Will my mother pour her coffee slower that morning, wondering if the girl she called stubborn now answered only to military command? But I already knew. They'd pretend not to read it. They'd pretend it didn't sting. And that's fine, because this wasn't for them. It never was. I folded the operation report into a sealed packet, stamped my clearance, walked out of the embassy with my head high, and as I passed a mirror in the corridor, I caught a glimpse. A uniform that didn't just represent rank. It represented resurrection. 3 days later, I stood before the Secretary of Defense, not in a ceremony, not in a press conference. In a private, windowless room beneath Arlington, where walls held more secrets than names, and honors were not spoken, only understood. He didn't rise when I entered, just nodded toward the seat across from him and said, "You're the one they wrote off. Aren't you?" I sat down without responding. Some questions don't require answers. They're just acknowledgments cloaked in curiosity. He opened the folder between us. I read every line of the Berlin file, he said, fingers tapping lightly on the cover. Not because I had to, because I wanted to understand how someone erases herself and ends up holding half the system together. I said nothing. I never speak to impress. He studied me for a long moment. You know what surprises me? I waited. That the ones they abandon are always the ones who carry the most weight. He slid a small velvet box across the table. I didn't open it. Not yet. He leaned forward. You're being assigned permanent shadow command. Black clearance. 2 new divisions. Name them. Staff them. You decide. I finally looked at the box, and when I opened it, it wasn't a medal. It was a pin, small, dark, carved with a symbol I hadn't seen since my first covert operation, a phoenix. Phoenix rose. That old call sign from years ago. Resurrected not as a relic, but as a command. This isn't ceremony, he said. It's recognition. You've been leading from the shadows long enough. Now we need you visible. Not for publicity. For stability. The box closed with a soft click. and I rose. Before leaving, I turned toward him and asked, quietly, what happens when visibility makes them nervous? He didn't hesitate. Then we let them be nervous. Outside. The corridors were lined with protocol officers passing by with quiet deference, doors opening with the hiss of high-grade clearance. But even as I walked through all of it, surrounded by ranks and salutes and silence, my mind returned home, not to childhood, but to that house. The one on Rosehaven Lane. Dad's old study still smelled like pipe tobacco and disappointment. The curtains always drawn, the light always yellow. He kept his medals above the fireplace, in a glass case. I used to stare at them, the way some girls stared at ballerinas or movie stars, hoping, someday, he'd lift the latch and let me touch one, tell me their stories, pass something down that wasn't just duty, but belief. But when I brought home my first medal, the one from Afghanistan, he wouldn't even look at it. He told me, it doesn't count if no one sees it. And I remember thinking, then you'll never see me. He never did. Even as he died, apparently, that belief remained. His will wasn't a document, it was a verdict. And I was the one who didn't belong. Until I walked into the Pentagon with a command badge he never earned, and the silence that had once smothered me fell silent itself. That night, I returned to the hotel. Same room, same view of the monument's edge, but something in me had shifted. Not the usual post-operation weariness, not even the exhaustion of being needed again. It was something quieter, a release. I stared at my phone. I hadn't called home in over a year, and home hadn't called me in longer than that. But the news was out now. They'd know. They always found a way to know when it was too late to speak. I opened my inbox. Dozens of unread messages, and one stood out. Subject line from Sarah. I hesitated, then clicked. Saw the photos. You look powerful. Dad would have been proud, even if he'd never say it. I didn't know how to reach you, but I'm trying. Maybe that counts for something. I sat with that. Not anger, not relief. Just the strange thud of words landing where none had before. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. Instead, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city glowed below sharp, golden veins pulsing through the dark. And I thought about the word disgrace. How easily it's given to women who refuse to bow. How families love to rewrite your story in their favor until the world writes it louder. You ever notice that the moment you stop asking to be seen, the world suddenly stares, that the second you stop shrinking, they can't help but measure your silhouette? Let me ask you something. Banjam bao giojung, truak mot kan, kong machin mau mukua min kong mo. Have you ever watched your father lower his eyes when you walk into the room, not because he's ashamed of you, but because you remind him of everything he couldn't be? That was me. Every Sunday dinner, every birthday I wasn't invited to, every photo where my name was left off the caption. But not anymore, because now, there are rooms I walk into where the entire country stands. Rooms where the salute is not optional, where the rank can't be denied, and where, for once, I don't have to explain myself to anyone. A week later, I received a formal request to attend a memorial ceremony. For my father, posthumous commendation, community service, lifetime military recognition. I almost declined, but something in me said, show up. So I did. In uniform. No one expected me. Not my brother, who choked slightly when he saw me walk down the aisle. Not my sister, who reached for her bag like she suddenly had something to do. Not my mother, who stood frozen as if seeing a ghost. The mayor gave a speech, then a senator, and then a Pentagon liaison approached the microphone and cleared his throat. We'd like to recognize not only the late Colonel Jonathan Cross, he said, but also someone who has continued his legacy in ways too classified to name and too honorable to ignore. He turned toward me. Major General Cross. Will you join us? Gasps. Then silence. Every head turned, and for the first time in decades, the silence didn't sting. It bowed. I rose, walked down that aisle not as a daughter desperate for acceptance, but as a woman who had outgrown it. The liaison extended the flag, folded, heavy, and placed it in my hands, not Julian's, not Sarah's, mine. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I no longer needed proof. My life had already become the answer. The flag was heavier than I remembered. Not physically, I've carried gear twice its weight through desert wind and jungle rot, but symbolically. It carried all the things he never said, all the apologies folded into corners, all the silences stitched into stars. When the liaison placed it in my arms, he looked me in the eye and nodded, not out of courtesy, but comprehension. This wasn't about closure, it was about reclamation. I turned slowly, letting the room see what they had ignored for decades, letting them witness, and they did. Not one person clapped, not one camera flashed, but the silence shifted. No longer the kind that erased, the kind that humbled. I walked back to my seat, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my ribs, and I saw them. My brother's jaw tight, his hand half raised, then lowered again, unsure whether to salute or hide. My sister gripping her program, her eyes flicking between me and the casket like trying to rewrite a memory before it calcified. My mother, blinking slowly, as if finally seeing me without the blur of expectation. She didn't reach for me, didn't whisper my name, but her lips parted, and for her, that was an earthquake. I sat, flag in lap, hand steady. Not one part of me trembled, because what they had tried to steal: identity, respect, belonging, I had already rebuilt with titanium and time. The ceremony closed with a hymn he used to hum while polishing his shoes. Eternal Father, strong to save. I stood through every note, not for him, not for forgiveness, for discipline, for dignity, for the code I lived by even when it didn't love me back. Outside, reporters waited. I ignored them. Uniform straight, hair tucked tight. Flag still in hand, I walked past every question. General Cross. How did it feel? Will you comment on the will controversy? Is it true your father disowned you? They chased shadows. I moved with clarity. But one voice pierced through the chaos. Not press, not politician. My niece, barely 16. Long brown hair like Sarah's, jacket sleeves too long, eyes too wide. She stepped forward timidly and held out a single folded piece of paper. I found this in Grandpa's drawer after he passed. I think he meant to send it. I took it. She didn't linger, just gave a tiny nod and disappeared back into the crowd. In the car, I unfolded it. A letter, handwritten, no envelope. To Evelyn, if you're still reading these things, I didn't understand your path. That was my failing. I thought legacy meant predictability. That honor had a shape, a uniform I could recognize. But then I saw you on the news. Not the medals, not the titles. The way you stood. Unshaken. Maybe that's honor, too. I don't know if it's too late. But if I am who I thought I was, I should have been proud. So this is me trying to say it. In the only way I know how. You didn't disgrace us. You saved us from our smallness. I closed the letter and stared at the seat in front of me. Did it make anything easier? Did it change the years he left me out? No. But it reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. Sometimes the people who bury you the deepest are the ones who are terrified of how brightly you rise. And maybe, just Maybe even the stubborn can learn to kneel. I kept the letter, not for comfort, for history, as evidence. Because one day, another girl might be standing in a hallway, medals tucked away, a family reunion happening without her, wondering if she matters. And she'll need to know you don't need applause to be undeniable. You don't need permission to belong. I returned to headquarters the next morning, new clearance, new team, same steel in my spine. The division I created, I called it Echo Command, because echoes are what remain when the shouting stops. They're what whisper truth when everyone else forgets. My team was handpicked, diverse, sharp. Some names no one had dared promote before. A few had stories like mine erased, dismissed, then quietly vindicated. We didn't need loud. We needed precise. Our first mission rolled out 48 hours later. I can't tell you the target, can't name the country, but I can tell you this. It worked. Flawlessly. Not because we were perfect, because we were prepared, because we knew what it meant to be underestimated, because we understood silence and used it as strategy. A month passed, then 2. The family never reached out again. No surprise. But one afternoon, during an internal security conference, I spotted Julian on the guest list. Civilian contractor now. Defense adjacent. He didn't see me at first, too busy checking his reflection in the conference room glass. But when I stepped to the podium, badge clipped, name displayed, he froze, didn't blink, didn't breathe. And for once, he was the one erased by the room, because all eyes were on me, and for the first time in our lives, he understood who I was. After the briefing, he approached, hesitant, like a man stepping into a country he didn't have a passport for. He cleared his throat. Eve. I turned slowly. Let him feel it. Let him search for footing on the ground he'd helped pull out from under me. I didn't know, he said. I gave a tight smile. You didn't ask. Silence again. But now it was his. He started to say something, maybe a line rehearsed, maybe real, but I stopped him with a gesture. It's done, I said. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for precision. Then I walked away. Not to wound, to continue. Because power isn't in the retribution, it's in the release. Later that evening, as I stood in the command room alone, I looked up at the wall of citations and saw a blank space next to my name. Not a mistake. A choice. They'd asked if I wanted to fill it with a quote. A motto. Anything I chose? I finally knew what to inscribe. She was never invited, but she was always essential. I submitted it that night. And when the engraving was done, I stood before it with quiet breath. You see, legacy isn't what they leave you. It's what you build yourself. And mine. It was unshakable. Some nights I sleep with my boots near the door. Not because I expect a call, not because I fear a breach, but because there's a part of me that's never stopped moving. Never stopped scanning the dark. Never stopped hearing the echo of a voice that once told me I didn't belong and learning to outgrow its gravity. You can be called general by the Secretary of Defense, saluted by men twice your age, feared by enemies you'll never meet, and still, somewhere deep beneath the uniform, there's a child who once pressed her nose against the window of a family dinner table, watching a place that was never truly set for her. That child never fully disappears. She just learns to command the room instead. Weeks passed. Then months. Echo Command grew into what the Pentagon quietly called the cleanest precision unit in Black Sector history. Not a headline, not a press release, just internal memos with phrases like silent asset brilliance and tactical surgical intervention with zero collateral. We didn't need praise. We operated beyond it. The missions blurred together political sabotage prevention in eastern corridors, intercepts on rogue AI signals from compromised satellites, one dramatic extraction of a U.S. analyst kidnapped in the Caucasus. All of it quiet, all of it impossible, all of it done. My file was locked tighter than a vault. Even most in the building only knew me by codename. But outside those walls, the silence began to crack. One morning, I woke to find a letter slid beneath my door. Handwritten. No seal. It was from my mother. I didn't know what to say at the memorial. I wore your father's old pin, and it felt heavier than I remembered. Not because of its size, because I knew I should have pinned it on you years ago. I see you now. I see what he couldn't. Maybe I always did. But it scared me. You were never soft. Eve. Never easy to raise. You didn't cry when you fell. You stood back up and stared the world down like it owed you an answer. And we didn't know what to do with that. But now, I understand why you never asked us for permission. You didn't need it. You needed space, and courage, and a battlefield to call your own. I'm sorry we weren't that, but I'm proud that you still became you. I didn't cry reading it, but I folded it, slowly, like I was tucking away something fragile. Then I placed it in the same drawer that held Dad's unsent note. 2 voices, late, but no longer lost. I carried those words into the next operation, not as armor, as evidence of who I'd become, not despite what they denied me, but because of it. You know that feeling, when you stop performing for the people who forgot your name, when you stop flinching at family reunions, waiting for someone to ask about your job, and instead, you bring the entire room to stillness just by walking in. I've had that now, more than once, and it never gets old. Because it isn't about ego. It's about recognition, not of rank, of truth. Let me tell you about the wedding. Julian's daughter, the niece who handed me Dad's letter, invited me, not out of politeness, out of insistence. She wrote, "Please come, not in uniform, just as you. I want you to sit in the front. I want everyone to see you." I didn't RSVP. I simply showed up. Navy dress, hair down, no insignia, just me. The ceremony was outdoors, garden lined with soft white petals, rows of people I didn't know and some I did, though they hadn't seen me in years. Sarah turned pale when I arrived. Julian's wife blinked twice and looked away. But my niece. She ran to me and hugged me like I was her compass. "You came," she whispered. "I always do," I said. At the reception, they gave me a table near the family. I didn't force conversation, didn't chase closure. I just sat, and that apparently was enough. Halfway through the speeches, the bride stood up, glass in hand. "I want to thank the person who showed me what real strength looks like," she said. "Who taught me that silence isn't always surrender, sometimes it's strategy. That women can lead without asking, love without shrinking, and win without applause." She turned to me. "Aunt Evelyn, thank you." Every head turned, every fork paused midair. And for once, I didn't look down. I met every single gaze, and I held it, because that's what reclamation looks like. Not revenge, not bitterness, just standing still while the world adjusts to the weight of who you really are. Later, Sarah approached me at the bar. She picked at the edge of a napkin. "You always knew, didn't you? Knew what, that they'd come around, that they'd see it. You never yelled, never demanded. You just waited." I shook my head. I didn't wait for them. I just kept moving. She nodded, a small tear threatening to fall, but she caught it before it did. And in that moment, we weren't enemies. We were just 2 women raised in the same house, finally speaking the same language. That night, I walked out under a canopy of stars. No noise, no fanfare. Just a breeze on my skin and the distant sound of laughter inside. And I thought, they called me a disgrace. Then the Pentagon called me general. Now, they call me home. But I'm not sure I need it anymore, because I have something rarer than acceptance. I have peace. I have truth. I have command not over others, but over myself. And when I return to base now, my boots don't just echo on the floors. They leave footprints. For the next girl. For the next silence breaker. For the next daughter who refuses to apologize for her strength. One morning at 04:30, I stood alone in the Echo Command briefing room. Lights low, coffee gone cold. Reports glowing on the screen. Outside, DC was just beginning to breathe that thin blue hour when the world is between exhale and inhale, between what happened and what comes next. I used to dread these hours. Now, they're mine. The door opened quietly. It was Lieutenant Ramos, one of my best analysts, sharp as broken glass and twice as useful. "General," she said, standing at ease. "Come in," I replied, eyes still on the screen. She approached with a sealed envelope. Priority transmission. No sender. I took it. The seal wasn't military. Not intelligence. Civilian. I opened it carefully. Inside a photo. Old. Grainy. Dated 1990. Me. Age 12. In the backyard of our Rosehaven house. Holding a cardboard sign, "I want to fly planes like Dad." I remember that day. It was summer. The cicadas were loud. Dad was on the porch, arms crossed, watching. He didn't smile when I held up the sign. He said, "That's cute. But pilots need discipline." I didn't cry then either. I just went inside and studied the technical manual he left on his desk. And now, 3 decades later, someone had sent that photo back to me. There was no note, just the image as if to say, "You did it." I turned to Ramos. "Tell the team full briefing at 0500 and have someone run a trace on this delivery." "Yes, General." She turned to go, then paused. "Ma'am," she said softly, "if I may, your niece, she's applying for the Naval Academy. She listed you as her mentor." I raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know that she asked me to deliver her recommendation file to your desk? Said you'd know what to do." Ramos left. And I sat there, still holding that photo of the girl with scraped knees and silent dreams. There's something surreal about becoming the person you once imagined in cardboard. Something even more surreal about watching the next generation pick up the torch, not from the men who silenced you, but from the silence itself. I drafted the letter that morning. To the admissions board. This candidate has already demonstrated the kind of courage we don't teach, the kind that comes from watching the world underestimate someone you love and choosing to become louder, braver, sharper in response. If she wears that uniform, it won't be for legacy. It'll be for mission. And you'll be lucky to have her. MG. Evelyn Cross. I signed it, sealed it, sent it out before 0600, then I suited up. A mission was pending, classified, tense. But that morning, I felt still. Do you know what it's like to reach a point where your presence no longer needs to be defended? To walk into a room and know that no one dares question your seat, because the chair was built for you, not by family, but by fire. The briefing began. Lines of code, movement on the northern front, allies shifting like chess pieces. The kind of operation that once would have demanded 20 approvals now cleared with a nod from me. I gave orders, fielded questions, dispatched units, and the entire time, I thought this is what they tried to keep from me. Not just power, recognition. A father's silence can shape you. A mother's refusal can bend your spine. A brother's absence can thicken your skin. But they can't erase you. They can't touch what's built in fire. After the mission closed, successful. No losses. I walked the halls. Echo Command felt like home now. Not just because I built it, because I belonged here. And then, as I passed the long glass wall facing the Potomac, I caught my reflection. Not the crisp uniform, not the stars, not the braid at the back of my neck. My face. Calm. Not neutral. Not hardened. Calm. Because for the first time in years, I didn't have anything left to prove. I'd spent decades sharpening myself into something that couldn't be ignored, but now I had become something more dangerous than feared, undeniable. At noon, I received an invitation. The Pentagon was hosting a strategic symposium. Think tanks, military historians, policymakers, and they wanted me to close it. Not just speak. Close. I hadn't given a public address in 10 years. Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. My work didn't belong on podiums. But maybe now, it did. The topic, the future of unseen war. Fitting. I stepped onto the stage that Friday in a black tailored uniform. No hat, no gloves, just presence. The room was packed. Academics, veterans, ambassadors. My name tag was subtle M.G.E. Cross. I stood at the microphone, looked out. Somewhere near the back row. Julian. Alone. Watching. I began. War is no longer waged only in trenches and territories. It's waged in code, in silence, in rooms where names are forgotten and choices are permanent. We used to think soldiers were built by boot camp, but some of us were built long before that in living rooms where no one believed in us, in families who handed us silence instead of support. And still, we served. Still, we endured. Still, we became the ones who now protect the very people who never said thank you. The room was silent. I let it hang, then continued. I was called a disgrace in a legal document by someone who wore the uniform before me. And now I train the people who protect his name. Because legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. One quiet mission at a time. One denied salute at a time. One forgotten daughter at a time who refuses to be forgotten. Applause didn't erupt. It rose. A tide. Not for performance. For truth. And as I stepped off the stage, people reached for my hand. For photos. For connection. But I didn't stay. I had a flight to catch. A new recruit class was graduating in Quantico, and one of them, my niece, she didn't know I was coming. But when she walked across that stage, the metal clipped to her chest, barely catching sunlight, and she saw me in the front row. She stopped, eyes wide, and I saluted her. First. Not because I had to, because she deserved it. Because we do. Because this is how it begins again, but different this time. No more silence. Just service. With truth on our backs like armor. The ceremony ended just before sunset. The kind of soft orange light that makes even concrete look tender. The cadets were still lined up, perfectly straight, perfectly still, while families broke into laughter, lifted cameras, and rushed forward with balloons and bouquets. But I didn't move. I remained standing at the edge of the courtyard, just behind the row of saluting instructors. My niece was still on the podium, talking to her commanding officer. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, looking for me. I knew, not to ask for approval, she already had that, but to check that I was real, that the figure in the front row hadn't just been a projection or a trick of light. I stayed in uniform. I stayed in sight. She jogged over to me after the formality ended, her boots still awkward, but her gaze steady. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she asked. "Because I didn't want you to look for me. I wanted you to look forward." She smiled, sheepish. Did I do okay? I looked her over. The squared shoulders, The trembling fingers? The fire in her that she hadn't quite figured out how to direct yet. "You're not okay," I said. "You're dangerous." Her laugh broke the tension. We walked together for a few moments, weaving through the crowd. Everyone kept turning to look. Not at her. At me. They didn't whisper like civilians. They didn't point like journalists. They recognized the stars on my collar. The silence I carried like a weapon. A man in a pressed suit stopped us, an admiral. Retired. I knew his name, though he didn't know mine. "You're General Cross," he said, offering his hand. "They're still talking about your Berlin operation in war colleges." "They shouldn't be," I replied, shaking his hand. He laughed. "I told my daughter to read your dossier. Told her. You want to lead follow this woman's ghost." Then he left, just as quick as he came. My niece stared after him, stunned. "You're a myth," she said softly. "In their world." I turned to her. "You think myths are born with parades?" She shook her head. "No, they're made in silence. We didn't stay long. These events aren't for people like me. They're for those still learning how to be seen." I left her with her friends and walked to the parking lot alone. Not out of distance, out of instinct. Out of training. As I opened the car door, I caught my reflection in the window again. That same woman, stronger now, no longer waiting for someone to turn, to call her name, to see. You don't need to be seen when you know what you are. You command now, not just people, space, stillness, history. I drove back to base in silence. No music, no calls. And somewhere between the highway signs and the city lights, I thought, this is what Dad never got to understand. That power wasn't in inheritance. It was in repetition. Waking up before the sun. Reading every line twice. Holding your tongue when they questioned your clearance. Speaking up when no one else would. Carrying the burden so others wouldn't have to. I made a career out of silence. But now I was learning to speak again. 2 days later, I received a request from the Department of Veteran Affairs. They wanted me to participate in a legacy oral history project, to sit down, on camera, and tell the story, not for publicity, for the archive, for those who come next, for the daughter who never got a seat at the table and built her own war room instead. I said yes. The studio was small, minimalist, government-funded, just a single camera, a mic, and a young interviewer with too many note cards. She asked me to state my name and rank. I did. Then she asked the first question. "What would you say to the girl you used to be?" I paused. And then I answered. "I'd say no one is coming to save you, but you'll become the one who saves others." She nodded, writing furiously. Second question. "What did it cost?" "Everything." But I didn't say that. I said silence, time, names, but I'd pay it again. The third question she didn't even need to ask, because I leaned in, just slightly, and spoke directly into the lens. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and suddenly everyone stops talking, when you wear your name like a question because you know they're judging you before you speak. When your own blood forgets how to say your title because they never believed you'd earn one. I let it breathe. Then I added, "You don't need them to clap. You don't need them to write you back into the story. You are the story." We ended the interview. No applause, just a nod of thanks. And as I walked out, I thought, maybe this is how we begin to heal. Not with vengeance, not with speeches, but with presence. With girls watching the tape 10 years from now and whispering, "If she did it, maybe I can. Maybe that's enough." That night, back in my quarters, I opened the drawer again. Dad's letter, Mom's apology, my niece's graduation photo, all laid out. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like a piece of the family's past. I felt like its future. I tucked the papers away, not to hide them, to protect them, to remind myself that even legends are built on paper cuts, and that the real power is in what we choose not to destroy. There was one final event I knew I had to attend. Not a mission, not an assignment, a dedication. The Department of Defense was unveiling a new wing inside Arlington Hall, a facility once cloaked in Cold War silence, now reimagined as a living memorial to unseen service, intelligence officers, analysts, operatives, those who worked behind locked doors and blank files. They'd requested I be there, not as a guest, as the opening keynote. I almost declined. I'd spoken enough, commanded enough, proven enough. But then I saw the plaque. My name was carved into the glass wall. No bio, no praise, just a single line beneath it. She served in silence and never asked to be remembered. That stopped me, because I had asked, once, long ago, as a girl, as a daughter, to be remembered, to be seen. And now I was, but not because they gave me that honor, because I became it. I arrived 15 minutes early, just like I always do, never late, never rushed. That's what they never understood, that for some of us, timing is survival. The hall was built in minimalist steel and soft marble. A quiet space, no flags waving, no brass playing. Just a narrow pool running through the center like a river of memory, and names etched into glass along its sides. They seated me in the front row, next to policymakers, dignitaries, warfighters in tailored suits. Someone handed me a small card. I was to speak third. 5 minutes. Brief, symbolic. I folded the card and never looked at it again. As the first speaker rose, a retired general I once intercepted data for, without him ever knowing, I turned slightly, scanning the crowd. Julian was there. Again. No tie this time. His daughter at his side, in a cadet uniform, her hat perfectly squared on her lap. He didn't wave. He just nodded. Not an apology. In understanding. That was enough. The first speaker finished. Applause scattered. Then the second, a senator recited a pre-written statement full of adjectives and abstractions. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. No notes, no slides, no pretenses, just presence. I walked to the podium, let the silence settle, and then I spoke. There are no parades for people like us, no documentaries, no statues. We were trained to be absent, to be the shadow in the hallway, to be the file that disappears. But the truth is, even shadows leave a shape. A few heads tilted, a few breath holds broke. I continued. I was told once by someone I loved that legacy is loud, that medals are only real if they shine in the sun. But I've learned the real ones tarnish. The real ones stay hidden. And the real warriors, I paused. Let it hit. They bleed in places you'll never see. And they rise anyway. No applause yet. Good. They were listening. I didn't grow up expecting to be a general. I grew up hoping my father would read my application letter out loud at dinner. He never did. He folded it in half and used it as a bookmark. But I still went. Still served. Still stood. And now I stand here. I looked toward the river of names. All of them did the same. They stood. Even when the world sat down. Even when their families turned away. Even when silence was the only inheritance they received. Now the applause came. Not roaring, but rising. I stepped back. Let them feel the weight of it. And I returned to my seat. But the moment that changed everything wasn't mine. It came 10 minutes later, when they unveiled the wall, glass, backlit, hundreds of names, no ranks, no units, just initials, last names, and dates. And there, halfway down cross E 2002 present people crowded around, whispered, took photos. But Julian, he didn't move. He stayed seated, and I watched as tears slipped quietly down his face. Not dramatic, not performative, just truth, finally catching up to him. Later, as the crowd thinned and the cameras were packed away, he approached, hands in pockets, eyes unsure. He stood beside me for a long time without speaking. Then, finally, I was wrong. I didn't look at him. I just said, I know. He nodded, took out something from his coat pocket. A worn photo. Same one I'd received weeks ago, the cardboard sign. The 12-year-old girl. The backyard shadow of a man just out of frame. I found this after the funeral, he said. Didn't know what to do with it. I looked at him now. Frame it. He raised an eyebrow. For who, he asked? For your daughter? He smiled. A little broken. She already did. It's on her desk. And with that, he left. I remained standing in front of the wall, reading names, remembering. Then I heard it, from behind me. A whisper. From a woman I didn't recognize. She was speaking to her son, maybe 7 or 8 years old. They were staring at the wall. She was the one who got erased. She told him. And then they called her General. The boy didn't answer. He just looked at me and nodded. The future sees us, even when the past didn't. I stayed a little longer, until the sun dipped low enough to reflect perfectly off the water and onto the glass. My name glowed, not because I asked it to, because it was time. And as I turned to leave, I didn't feel weight. I felt ease. Peace doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes like this, after decades, after silence, after your entire family has tried to forget you. And the world remembers you anyway. I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.